The wrong man to call the cops on. I've dealt with entitled people before. 30 years in uniform will do that to you. But this HOA Karen. She crossed into a level of stupidity I hadn't seen in decades. Picture this. I'm standing in my own driveway, fueling up my truck from the private diesel pump installed legally in my garage. It's a quiet afternoon. Smell of fuel in the air. Tools laid out neatly. Peaceful. Then I hear it. The sharp, aggressive clicking of designer heels on concrete. Brenda Ashworth. She marched across my driveway like she was inspecting troops, chin high, sunglasses oversized, Range Rover gleaming behind her like a trophy. She stopped 3 feet from me and said, without blinking, "Fill up my Range Rover, Marcus. As HOA president, I shouldn't have to pay for gas when residents have fuel available." I stared at her. Then I laughed. Absolutely not. Her face tightened. And without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "I need police assistance. This man is being hostile and threatening." The audacity was breathtaking. But here's what Brenda didn't know. She had just called the police on the police chief. "My name is Marcus Kellerman. I'm 52 years old. 20 years in military logistics before transitioning into law enforcement. I've moved equipment across war zones, coordinated supply chains across continents, and managed crisis situations most civilians only see in movies. Preparation is survival. That lesson never leaves you." Life humbled me long before Brenda showed up. My wife, Sarah, fought cancer for 2 brutal years. Treatments, hospital rooms, bills stacking like sandbags before a flood. When she passed last spring, the silence inside our home became unbearable. Every creaking floorboard carried memory. So I sold everything and moved to Willowbrook Estates. 200 homes. Tree-lined streets. Suburban calm. The kind of place where people wave from porches and argue about lawn height. Or so I thought. The HOA used to be sensible. Keep your lawn trimmed. No neon pink houses. Basic stuff. Then Brenda arrived. She came from some gated luxury neighborhood where entitlement is apparently listed as a community amenity. Within 8 months, she maneuvered her way into HOA presidency on a platform of elevating standards and protecting property values. Translation. Control. It didn't take long to see her pattern. Violation notices for the Rodriguez family over excessive vehicle presence. They owned 2 cars. Fines for Mr. Orion's vegetable garden because it wasn't aesthetically aligned. Harassment letters sent to a young black couple for installing a basketball hoop. Meanwhile, similar setups on certain other lawns received complete silence. Selective enforcement isn't subtle when you've spent a career spotting abuse of power. Now about my fuel pump. When I bought the house, it came with a professional-grade diesel setup. The previous owner had agricultural permits. I upgraded the system, invested 15 grand into safety features, inspections, and compliance. Fire marshal approved. Insurance documented. Everything by the book. During the last power outage, I fueled generators for 3 elderly neighbors so their medical equipment wouldn't shut down. That's when Brenda took interest. She showed up one morning in those same ridiculous heels and started interrogating me about zoning, compliance, community resources. I showed her the permits. Her smile turned sour. "We'll see about that." A week later, I received a $500 fine for unauthorized commercial activity. Commercial activity. For fueling my own truck. I responded with documentation thicker than her PowerPoint slides. That's when I understood something critical. Brenda didn't care about being right. She cared about winning. And she had decided I was going to be her example. She just didn't realize she'd chosen the wrong battlefield. End of part 1. Ready for part 2. The emergency that wasn't. 3 days after I submitted proof that my fuel pump was completely legal, Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting. Emergency. Like my garage was about to detonate and level half the county. The community center smelled like stale coffee and old carpet cleaner. 30 confused neighbors sat in folding chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. Brenda stood at the front with a projector screen behind her. PowerPoint. Because nothing says suburban crisis like a laser pointer. Ladies and gentlemen, she began dramatically, we are facing a serious safety hazard. Up popped a blown-up photo of my fuel pump with bright red arrows pointing at it like it was evidence in a crime documentary. Bold red captions read, explosion risk. Environmental disaster. Property value collapse. If Hollywood ever needed someone to market apocalypse movies, they'd found their star. I raised my hand. She ignored me. Instead, she launched into 15 full minutes of worst-case scenarios ripped straight from action films. Explosions leveling homes, groundwater contamination turning Willowbrook into Chernobyl, insurance companies fleeing in terror. I watched neighbors shift nervously in their seats. Fear spreads fast when it's dressed up as authority. Finally, Brenda declared, I motion for an immediate $1,000 fine and a 48-hour removal deadline. 4 board members raised their hands instantly. That's when I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the room like a blade. Before you vote, I said calmly, maybe we should review actual facts. I walked forward carrying a thick manila folder. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. First document. Here's last month's fire marshal inspection report. Passed with 0 violations. In fact, the installation exceeds code requirements. Murmurs. Second document. Agricultural exemption paperwork. Filed properly. Renewed annually. Fully compliant under state and federal law. More murmurs. Third document. Insurance certification. Full coverage. Premium reduction due to enhanced safety features. Now people were shifting for a different reason. Then I dropped the twist. Oh, and Fire Marshal Henderson. He's sitting right there in the 3rd row. Every head turned. Jim Henderson stood up, smiling. Folks, he said, I've inspected hundreds of fuel systems in 30 years. Marcus's setup is textbook. Safer than most gas stations. The room erupted. Brenda's expression cycled through colors I didn't know human skin could produce. Well, she stammered, safety isn't the only concern. Property values. Aesthetics. Traffic. During the winter outage, Dorothy Martinez interrupted from the back, Marcus kept my husband's oxygen machine running all night. That cracked the dam. One by one, neighbors stood up. The single mom whose basement avoided flooding. The veteran whose medical equipment stayed powered. The family who needed emergency fuel during the ice storm. My dangerous installation had helped half the room. Brenda called for recess. Vote postponed. Round 1 went to me. For 2 weeks, everything went quiet. Too quiet. I should have known better. I was rebuilding a carburetor in my garage when I heard unfamiliar voices outside. A man in a polo shirt and clipboard stood in my driveway. City zoning inspector. Mr. Kellerman, he said politely, we received a complaint about unauthorized commercial fuel sales. I almost laughed. Apparently now I was running a black market gas station. He conducted a full inspection. Every permit verified. Every safety standard exceeded. Every accusation disproven. This is one of the most properly installed private systems I've seen, he admitted. And right on cue, Brenda appeared. Click. 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 Designer heels announcing her arrival like a drum roll. Inspector, I trust you're taking this violation seriously. There are no violations, he said calmly. Her smile cracked. He added one more detail before leaving. Filing false complaints with city offices can result in fines up to $5,000. I watched that information settle into her brain. She didn't look scared. She looked angry. This isn't over, she hissed. And she meant it. That evening, a neighbor texted me. Check the Nextdoor app. Brenda had created an account called Concerned Willowbrook Resident. She was spreading posts about dangerous fuel storage, declining property values, and community safety threats. Some neighbors defended me. Others bought the fear. But something caught my eye. 3 of the loudest anti-Marcus accounts had been created within days. Stock profile pictures. Zero history. Fake accounts. Manufactured outrage. I screenshot everything. 20 years in military logistics teaches you something important. If someone escalates, document everything. Brenda wasn't just attacking my fuel pump anymore. She was trying to poison the entire neighborhood against me. And that told me one thing. She was getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Let's turn up the heat. Fire Part 3, the investigator's phone call. The next morning started peacefully. Coffee in hand. Birds chirping. Quiet street. Then an unmarked sedan rolled into my driveway. 2 people stepped out. No uniforms. No introductions. Just cameras and measuring tools like they were processing a crime scene. They began circling my fuel pump. No knock. No permission. I stepped onto the porch. Morning. Something I can help you with? The woman barely looked up. Property assessment. Insurance compliance. Interesting, I said calmly. My insurance company didn't schedule anything. Identification, please. The man with the buzz cut stepped forward, puffed up with borrowed authority. Sir, I suggest you return inside your residence. I've dealt with real authority my entire life. This wasn't it. I suggest you remove yourselves from my private property before I contact actual law enforcement. That did it. They retreated, but not before snapping dozens of photos. Amateur hour. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Kellerman, this is Rick Santos from Apex Investigations. We need to discuss Brenda Ashworth. Now that was interesting. I'm listening. She hired my firm to investigate you. Specifically asked us to find anything illegal, embarrassing, or compromising. Offered a $5,000 bonus if we uncovered something that could get you arrested or forced to relocate. The audacity was almost impressive. And you're telling me this because... A pause. Because when I ran your background check, I discovered who you are. Silence. Mr. Kellerman, she hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on a police chief. There it was. The moment everything shifted. Brenda had spent months attacking me, never once bothering to find out what I did for a living. She thought I was just some blue-collar homeowner with a diesel pump. She had no idea she'd been harassing the man who ran the local police department. She doesn't know. I asked. Not a clue. When I told her, she accused me of making excuses and demanded we keep digging. I thanked him for his integrity and hung up. Brenda had crossed from petty HOA harassment into felony-adjacent territory. Hiring investigators to intimidate a law enforcement official? That's not clever. That's criminally reckless. But she wasn't done. That afternoon, while I was under my truck changing oil, dispatch called. Chief, we have a situation. A formal harassment complaint has been filed against you. I slid out from beneath the truck. Who filed it? Brenda Ashworth. Claims stalking, intimidation, abuse of authority. I actually laughed. She had filed a false police report against the police chief. You can't script irony that thick. I immediately recused myself and assigned it to Lieutenant Maria Martinez. Full protocol. No shortcuts. If it was bogus, the investigation would prove it. Maria sat in my kitchen 2 hours later, recorder running. Chief, I have to ask, any validity to these allegations? Zero, I replied. Security footage covers every angle of my property. I've spoken to her twice. Both public. Both with witnesses. We reviewed footage. Every claim dismantled in minutes. Maria shook her head. I've seen some stupid false complaints. Filing one against your own police chief. That's Olympic-level stupidity. She closed her file. Recommendation. Unfounded complaint. Evidence of harassment pattern. Brenda had just created a documented record of malicious behavior. And she still didn't know who she was really fighting. That night, I did what any reasonable person does when someone escalates like this. I started looking at public records. HOA financial records are accessible to any homeowner. Most people don't bother. I do. I pulled the last 8 months of expenses, since Brenda took office. And my coffee nearly turned to acid in my mouth. Legal consultation fees. $15,000 to Ashworth and Associates. Ashworth. Her maiden name. Her brother-in-law's firm. Landscaping contract. $8,200 to Premier Grounds Management. Owned by her nephew. Security consulting. $6,500 to Residential Safety Solutions. Run by her cousin. Emergency roof repairs. $12,400. Awarded to another relative. The pattern wasn't subtle. Every major contract had gone to family. None of the relationships disclosed. All presented as competitive bidding. Total. $47,000 in 8 months. That wasn't HOA mismanagement. That was embezzlement. And unlike her fake safety reports, this was real federal territory. Fiduciary duty violations. Conflict of interest concealment. Wire fraud potential. I printed everything. Because suddenly, my fuel pump wasn't the issue. I wasn't the problem. I was the neighbor who might notice where the money was going. Brenda hadn't been trying to remove a hazard. She'd been trying to silence a threat. And she had just handed me the leverage to end her entire operation. End of part 3. Ready for part 4. Let's finish what she started. Fire part 4, the beginning of the end. Monday morning, I made a phone call. Not as Police Chief Marcus Kellerman. As Marcus Kellerman, homeowner. I'd like to report suspected embezzlement involving an HOA board, I told the district attorney's office. Undisclosed family contracts. Inflated pricing. Roughly $50,000 over 8 months. They told me to come in that afternoon. The white-collar crime unit office smelled like overworked coffee machines and long nights. Detective Jim Reynolds met me in a small conference room. Sharp eyes. CPA background. The kind of man who sees numbers the way a hunter sees tracks. I spread everything across the table. Contracts. Vendor registrations. Family business filings. HOA minutes. Payment approvals. He scanned the first few pages and leaned back slowly. She's not even trying to hide it. She doesn't think anyone's looking, I replied. I showed him comparable contractor quotes, half the price of what her nephew had charged. Proof that the so-called emergency roof repairs didn't match any insurance claims or structural reports. Reynolds tapped a page with his pen. This is textbook embezzlement. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conspiracy. Possibly federal wire fraud if these payments crossed state lines. How long? I asked. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Forensic accounting, interviews, full paper trail. We build it tight. Tight cases don't collapse in court. I agreed to testify if needed. Clean witness. No HOA leadership involvement. Just a homeowner who happened to read the books. But building a criminal case wasn't enough. Brenda needed to be removed before she could do more damage. That night, I called a meeting at Mel's Diner. Neutral ground. 6 neighbors showed up. Dorothy Martinez. Bob Orion. Janet Williams. A mix of retirees, parents, working families. I laid everything out in plain language. No legal jargon. Just facts. $47,000 redirected to her family businesses. None disclosed. The table erupted. She's been stealing from us. Bob demanded. Yes. From Mrs. Orion's fixed income. Janet asked quietly. Yes. That's when outrage turned into unity. Dorothy pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws she'd highlighted like a college textbook. Article 7, Section 3. 10 homeowners can petition for a special meeting. Majority vote can remove board members for documented cause. We had more than 10. But timing mattered. The DA is building a case, I told them. We move right after charges are filed. Maximum pressure. No escape route. What about retaliation? Someone asked. That's when I decided it was time. There's something you should know, I said calmly. I'm Police Chief Marcus Kellerman. Brenda has been filing false reports and hiring investigators to harass me. Silence. Then Dorothy burst out laughing. She's been targeting the police chief. Oh Lord. Relief filled the room. Fear evaporated. We organized statements, gathered documentation, built a coalition. By closing time, Brenda's empire had an expiration date. But Brenda wasn't going quietly. 2 days later, she called another emergency HOA meeting. 24 hours notice. Agenda: immediate removal of my fuel pump and a $10,000 community safety deposit. Translation: pay up or we'll destroy your property. The community center was packed. Tension thick in the air. Brenda stood at the front with a briefcase. She opened it dramatically. Inside were what she claimed were federal safety reports proving my installation violated 17 regulations. She even played the terrorism card. Terrorism concerns, she said confidently. Over a residential diesel pump. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was testing a new weapon, emergency assessments without proper board authority. 10,000 from me today. 10,000 from anyone else tomorrow. A slush fund disguised as safety. I stood up slowly. Before we vote, I said, I'd like copies of those federal reports. They contain sensitive information, she snapped. Classic move. If documents are too sensitive to show the people they affect, they either don't exist, or they contradict the claims. So I pulled out my phone. I'll just verify with the Environmental Protection Agency. Her face drained of color. Because I had already arranged something. I dialed. EPA Emergency Hotline. Agent Morrison speaking. Speakerphone on. I explained the situation. Sir, Agent Morrison replied clearly, the EPA has no protocols requiring removal of properly permitted residential fuel storage. Terrorism assessments fall under Homeland Security and do not apply to private fuel pumps within legal limits. The room exploded. Board members demanded to see the federal reports. Agent Morrison added one final nail. Anyone falsely claiming to possess federal terrorism documents could be violating federal law. Brenda looked like gravity had doubled. She tried to postpone the vote. Dorothy stood up immediately. I motion for a full financial audit of HOA expenditures since January. Unanimous vote. Even her allies weren't foolish enough to defend fake federal documents. Brenda gathered her briefcase like a magician whose trick had just been exposed. But she wasn't done. Desperate people escalate. And she was running out of options. End of part 4. Ready for part 5. Here we go. Fire part 5. Desperation turns nuclear. Thursday morning, I smelled panic before I saw it. Brenda's driveway was chaos. Boxes loaded into her Range Rover. Paper shredders running non-stop. Family members going in and out like a crisis management team responding to a 5-alarm fire. My phone buzzed. Detective Reynolds. Charges filing Monday. Keep your head down. That was the plan. But Brenda didn't do quiet. By noon, she launched her most reckless move yet. Flyers appeared on every doorstep in Willowbrook. According to Brenda, I was under federal investigation for terrorism-related activities. Social media posts claimed I was stockpiling dangerous chemicals. Anonymous tips flooded City Hall alleging illegal weapon storage and drug manufacturing. She didn't just escalate. She detonated. Within hours, my department was fielding calls about its own chief. I followed protocol again. Full transparency. Internal review. Documentation. Every allegation collapsed within minutes. Because when you've spent decades building a clean record, lies don't stick. But Brenda had made a catastrophic error. She'd crossed from HOA nonsense into criminal defamation and filing knowingly false reports across multiple agencies. That's not petty. That's prosecutable. Friday evening, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up to her house. Not mine. District Attorney's Office investigators. They went inside with folders. They came out with boxes. Her shredding hadn't been fast enough. Paper trails leave ghosts in bank systems. Digital transfers leave fingerprints. And forensic accountants are very good at following money. Word spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. Neighbors who once hesitated were now openly angry. The audit committee formed immediately. They began requesting full contract disclosures. 3 board members resigned within 48 hours. Brenda held out. Pride is expensive. Monday morning at 9:12 a.m., charges were formally filed. Embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, filing false police reports, potential federal wire fraud review pending. The press release hit local media by noon. By 3 p.m., an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled, not by Brenda, by the homeowners. I walked into that meeting quietly. No dramatic entrance. No speech prepared. Brenda sat at the front table. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look powerful. She looked tired. The charges were read aloud. Every contract. Every undisclosed family tie. Every inflated payment. When the vote for removal came, it wasn't close. Unanimous. Her presidency ended in under 30 seconds. But consequences were just beginning. Because while HOA removal is embarrassing, felony charges are life-altering. As she stood to leave, she locked eyes with me. "You did this," she said quietly. "No," I replied calmly. "You did." She thought this started with free gas. It didn't. It started with greed. And greed makes people sloppy. She'd tried to intimidate, manipulate, fabricate federal documents, and weaponize fear. She forgot one thing. When you build your power on deception, all it takes is one person willing to read the paperwork. That night, Willowbrook felt different. Calmer. Neighbors waved again. Dorothy brought over pie. Bob apologized for ever doubting me. And for the first time since Sarah passed, I felt something close to peace in that house. Brenda had wanted control. Instead, she exposed herself. She tried to call the cops on me over free fuel. She ended up calling down an entire criminal investigation on herself. And she still never filled up that Range Rover. End of part 5. Ready for the final chapter, part 6, the aftermath? Let's close this story the right way. Fire part 6, the aftermath. 6 months later, Willowbrook looked the same. Same manicured lawns. Same quiet streets. Same mailboxes standing in perfect suburban rows. But it felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Because corruption leaves a residue, and accountability scrubs it out. Brenda's trial didn't take long. Forensic accountants laid everything out with clinical precision. Bank transfers. Inflated invoices. Undisclosed family relationships. Email trails coordinating contracts before bids were even announced. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Guilty on multiple felony counts. Restitution ordered. Probation revoked due to false reporting escalation. And yes, federal review added additional penalties tied to wire transfers that crossed state lines. The woman who once threatened me with HOA fines walked out of court facing years of consequences instead. Power is fragile when it's fake. The HOA didn't dissolve. It transformed. Dorothy ran for interim president and won unanimously. First action. Independent financial oversight. Second. Transparent bidding for every contract. Third. Amendments requiring full conflict of interest disclosure with automatic removal for violations. Funny how quickly systems improve once fear is removed from the equation. The audit eventually uncovered even more questionable spending, small amounts compared to Brenda's, but enough to tighten procedures permanently. Willowbrook became something it had never been under her leadership. Functional. As for me, I kept the fuel pump. Fully permitted. Fully compliant. Fully boring. It still hums during outages. It still powered oxygen machines during the last winter storm. It still keeps basements dry when the grid fails. The difference? No one calls it dangerous anymore. Now they call it useful. And sometimes, late at night, when the neighborhood is quiet and the pump clicks softly after a shutdown cycle, I think about how close this all came to going differently. If I hadn't kept records. If I hadn't stayed calm. If I had let anger lead instead of documentation. Brenda wanted a fight. She expected intimidation to work. She never expected patience. That was her final mistake. One evening, months after sentencing, I ran into Rick Santos, the private investigator she hired. He nodded respectfully. "Never seen a client self-destruct that thoroughly," he said. "Desperation," I replied. He smiled. "No, ego." Maybe he was right. Because this was never about a fuel pump. It was about control. About someone who believed rules applied to everyone else. And about what happens when someone finally reads the fine print. People still joke about it sometimes. "How's the terrorist fuel operation, Chief?" Bob teases whenever he borrows a wrench. I just shake my head. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about sunlight. Corruption thrives in shadows. Transparency kills it. Brenda tried to burn me out of Willowbrook. Instead, she lit up her own paper trail. And once the light hit it, everything caught fire. The end.